The emergency alert cut through the morning silence like a blade. Unknown biological threat detected. Immediate containment required. Across the country, CDC helicopters lifted off from military bases and emergency protocols activated in government buildings from Atlanta to Washington. But in a small town that most people had never heard of, a quiet country doctor was already putting on protective gear. Because Dr. Natalie Cross knew exactly what they were dealing with. She had helped create it 8 years ago. And in exactly 72 hours, she would have to choose between saving the town that had become her home or protecting the secret that had kept her alive. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, from which city in the world are you watching today? And if stories like this move you, please consider subscribing. The morning had started like any other in Millbrook County. Dr. Cross arrived at her small clinic at 7:30. The same time she had every day for the past 5 years. To her patients, she was simply the young doctor who had moved from the city, competent, caring, and refreshingly down to earth. What they didn't know was that Dr. Natalie Cross wasn't her real name, and her previous career had nothing to do with treating colds and broken bones. She was reviewing patient files when Jake Morrison knocked on her door. Jake was a local farmer, well respected in the community, the kind of man who only came to the doctor when something was seriously wrong. He looked pale, his hands trembling slightly as he removed his baseball cap. "Doc, I'm not feeling right," he said, settling into the chair across from her desk. "Started yesterday after the Harvest Festival. Thought it was just the heat, but it's getting worse." Dr. Cross noted his symptoms as he described them: fever, muscle aches, difficulty breathing. On the surface, it looked like a severe flu, but something in her gut told her to dig deeper. She drew blood for testing, a routine procedure she had performed thousands of times. 20 minutes later, as she examined the sample under her microscope, her world tilted. The cellular structure she was looking at wasn't random. It was organized, engineered, designed. More specifically, it contained protein markers that she recognized from a project that was supposed to have been destroyed years ago. Her hands began to shake as she adjusted the microscope focus. There was no mistaking it. This was connected to Project Genesis, the classified biomedical defense program she had worked on 8 years earlier. The project that had changed her life forever. Dr. Cross stepped away from the microscope and walked to her office window, looking out at the peaceful main street of Millbrook. Children rode bicycles past the hardware store. Mrs. Patterson was watering flowers outside the diner. Everything looked normal, safe, exactly as it had been for the past 5 years. But she knew that safety was about to shatter. She pulled out her secure phone, a device she hadn't used in 3 years, and dialed a number she had memorized but hoped never to call. "This is Dr. Natalie Cross, authorization code Echo 77 Alpha," she said when the line connected. "I need to speak to Director Hamilton immediately. We have a Genesis situation." The response was immediate. "Stand by, Dr. Cross, patching you through." Within seconds, a familiar voice came on the line. "Natalie, we thought you were done with all this." "So did I, Frank. But I've got a patient here showing signs of exposure to engineered biological material. The protein markers match Genesis samples." There was a long pause. "That's impossible. All Genesis materials were destroyed." "I'm looking at the evidence right now. Someone has recreated the work, or they had samples we didn't know about." "How many cases?" Dr. Cross felt her stomach drop. "I need to check. Frank, if this is what I think it is, we need containment protocols now." Over the next 2 hours, her worst fears were confirmed. 8 people who had attended the Harvest Festival were showing similar symptoms. All of them had been in the same area of the festival grounds, near the food vendors and the main stage. Dr. Cross tested every sample herself, and the results were consistent. All 8 patients showed exposure to what she knew was a weaponized biological agent. By noon, the first CDC helicopter appeared on the horizon. Dr. Cross stood in the parking lot of her clinic, watching the black aircraft circle the town before landing in the high school football field. She had known this day might come eventually. For 5 years, she had lived quietly, treating everyday illnesses and building genuine relationships with her patients. She had almost convinced herself that Dr. Natalie Cross could stay buried forever. The CDC team that approached her clinic was led by Dr. Frank Hamilton, the same man she had called that morning. Frank was in his 50s, gray-haired and serious, but his expression softened when he saw her. "Hello, Rachel," he said, using her real name for the first time in years. "It's Natalie now," she replied, "and it has been for 5 years." Frank nodded. "Natalie, then. We need to know everything you've observed." As they walked into her clinic, Dr. Cross explained her findings. The protein markers, the symptom progression, the connection to the festival. Everything pointed to an intentional release of biological material based on Genesis research. "But Frank," she said as they reviewed her test results, "Genesis was supposed to be defensive research. We were developing rapid response systems to protect against biological attacks." "That's what we told ourselves," Frank replied grimly. "But you know as well as I do that the line between defense and offense gets blurry when you're dealing with this level of technology." Dr. Cross remembered why she had left the program 8 years earlier. She had discovered that Genesis wasn't just about protection, it was about creating biological weapons under the cover of defensive research. When she had tried to raise concerns about the ethical implications, she was told that her security clearance didn't extend to policy decisions. So she had made a choice that changed her life forever. She had stolen the genetic neutralization key, a piece of code that could disable any biological agent created through the Genesis program. Then she had destroyed as much of the research as she could access and disappeared into the federal witness protection program. For 8 years, she had believed that Genesis was dead and buried. Now she realized that someone had either preserved samples or reconstructed the research from fragments. "We need to set up a quarantine," Frank said, studying the town map. "Population of Millbrook is what, about 3,000? 3,200, Dr. Cross corrected. "But Frank, we can't just lock down the entire town. These people trust me. They've welcomed me into their community." "And they'll die if we don't contain this," Frank replied bluntly. "How long do we have?" Dr. Cross consulted her notes. Based on the original Genesis timeline, about 72 hours before the biological agent causes permanent damage. After that, she didn't need to finish the sentence. "Can you neutralize it?" "Possibly. I still have the genetic key stored in a secure location, but activating it requires very specific laboratory conditions." Frank was already on his radio, calling for a mobile laboratory unit. "How long to set up neutralization protocols?" "If everything goes perfectly, 18 hours minimum." Within 6 hours, Millbrook looked like a scene from a science fiction movie. CDC vehicles surrounded the town perimeter, and a mobile laboratory had been set up in the high school gymnasium. Dr. Cross found herself in the strange position of being both a respected consultant and a person of interest. After all, she was the only person in town who understood Genesis technology. As she worked in the mobile lab, preparing the complex process needed to activate the neutralization key, she became aware of activity outside. Through the gymnasium windows, she could see CDC personnel reviewing security footage from the Harvest Festival. Frank approached her workstation, looking troubled. "We found something on the festival security cameras." He handed her a tablet showing grainy footage from the festival. A man in a baseball cap and sunglasses could be seen near the food vendor area, carrying what appeared to be a small aerosol device. "Do you recognize him?" Frank asked. Dr. Cross studied the image, adjusting the zoom and contrast. Something about the man's posture seemed familiar, but she couldn't quite place it. "I'm not sure. The image quality isn't great. We're running facial recognition, but it's going to take time. In the meantime, we need to assume this was an intentional attack." As Dr. Cross continued working on the neutralization process, she couldn't shake the feeling that the man in the security footage was someone from her past. The way he moved, the careful positioning near the crowd, it suggested someone with knowledge of biological dispersal techniques. It was nearly midnight when Frank returned with news that made her blood run cold. "We got a hit on facial recognition," he said, his voice tight with concern. "The man at the festival is Dr. Marcus Vale." The name hit her like a physical blow. Marcus Vale had been her research partner on Project Genesis, one of the few people who understood the technology as well as she did. He was also the person who had reported her security concerns to program leadership 8 years ago, effectively ending her career and forcing her into hiding. "That's impossible," she said, though even as she spoke, she knew it wasn't. Marcus was supposed to be under investigation. His research was being reviewed for ethical violations. "3 months ago, that investigation was about to go public," Frank explained. "Vale disappeared from his university position the day before congressional hearings were scheduled to begin. We've been looking for him ever since." Dr. Cross felt the pieces falling into place. "He's not trying to prove anything about Genesis capabilities," she realized. "He's trying to make me look responsible. If people die from Genesis-based biological agents in a town where I've been living under an assumed identity, it would look like you never really left the program," Frank finished, "like you were conducting unauthorized research. And Marcus would be able to claim that he was trying to stop a rogue scientist," Dr. Cross added. "It's actually brilliant in a terrifying way." Frank's radio crackled with urgent chatter. "We've got movement at the town perimeter," a voice reported. "Single individual attempting to leave on foot through the eastern checkpoint." Frank and Dr. Cross rushed outside, where they could see a commotion at the edge of town. CDC personnel were surrounding someone near the main road, their flashlights creating a circle of harsh white light in the darkness. "That's him," Frank said, studying the figure through binoculars. "That's Vale." But as they watched, the man broke free from the initial containment attempt and ran toward the mobile laboratory. Dr. Cross realized what he was planning. If he could destroy the neutralization work, the biological agent would continue to spread, creating the large-scale field test he needed to validate his research. "He's heading for the lab," she shouted, running toward the gymnasium. Inside the mobile laboratory, Dr. Cross could hear Vale moving through the equipment. She entered carefully, knowing that he was likely armed and definitely desperate. "Hello, Rachel," Vale said, emerging from behind a bank of computers. He looked older than she remembered, his hair gray and his face lined with stress. "I have to say, you've done an excellent job of disappearing." "The name is Natalie now," she replied, keeping her voice steady. "And I'm not disappearing anymore." "No, I suppose you're not. Though after tonight it won't matter what name you use." Vale was holding a device that she recognized, an electromagnetic pulse generator that would destroy all the electronic equipment in the laboratory, including the computers running the neutralization process. "Marcus, you don't have to do this," she said. "The investigation into your work doesn't have to destroy your life." "My life was destroyed the day you decided to play whistleblower," Vale replied. 8 years of hiding, 8 years of watching my research get credited to other people, 8 years of knowing that I could have changed the world if you hadn't interfered." "Changed the world by creating biological weapons?" "By creating tools that could protect our country," Vale corrected. "But you were always too naive to understand the bigger picture." Dr. Cross could see the neutralization process continuing on the computer screens behind Vale. She was less than 3 hours away from completing the protocol that would save everyone in Millbrook. She couldn't let him destroy that work. "The people in this town have nothing to do with our past," she said. "Jake Morrison, the farmer who first came to see me, he has a daughter in college and a son in high school. Mrs. Patterson, who runs the diner, has lived here for 60 years. These aren't abstract research subjects, Marcus. They're real people with real lives. And they'll be remembered as the people who helped prove that Genesis technology works," Vale replied, raising the pulse device. Dr. Cross didn't hesitate. 8 years of quiet country living hadn't erased her training in crisis response. She dove toward Vale, grabbing for the device while simultaneously hitting the emergency backup power switch that would protect the computer systems. The struggle was brief but intense. Vale was larger and stronger, but Dr. Cross had the advantage of knowing the laboratory layout. She managed to knock the pulse device from his hands, sending it skittering across the floor. Frank and the CDC security team arrived just as Vale was reaching for a backup device, a small explosive that would destroy the laboratory entirely. They restrained him before he could activate it, but the damage to some of the equipment was already done. "How much time do we need to repair this?" Frank asked, surveying the damaged computers. Dr. Cross was already assessing the situation, her mind racing through alternatives. "The main neutralization program is intact, but we've lost some of the synthesizing equipment. I can work around it, but it's going to take longer." "For the next 18 hours, Doctor." Cross worked almost without stopping. The people of Millbrook had been told that there was a contamination issue requiring medical treatment, and most of them had cooperated with the quarantine. But she could see the fear in their eyes when she visited the patients who were getting sicker. Jake Morrison's condition had worsened significantly. His wife Susan sat beside his hospital bed, holding his hand and trying to stay strong for their children. When Dr. Cross entered the room, Susan looked up with eyes full of trust and hope. "You're going to fix this, aren't you, Doc?" she asked. "Yes," Dr. Cross replied, meaning it completely. "I'm going to fix this." She had managed to modify the neutralization process to work with the damaged equipment, but it required her to personally monitor each step. There was no room for error, no backup systems, no second chances. As the sun rose over Millbrook on the third day, Dr. Cross initiated the final stage of the neutralization protocol. The genetic key she had stolen 8 years earlier was finally being used for its intended purpose, not as a weapon, but as a cure. The first sign of success came from Jake Morrison. His fever broke, his breathing improved, and the dangerous protein markers began disappearing from his blood tests. One by one, the other patients showed similar improvements. By noon, the crisis was over. Frank found Dr. Cross sitting outside the mobile laboratory, exhausted but relieved. "The neutralization worked perfectly," he said. "All patients are responding well. No permanent damage, no fatalities." "And Marcus?" "In federal custody. He'll be facing charges for bioterrorism, among other things." Dr. Cross nodded, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders that she had been carrying for 8 years. "What happens now, Frank?" "That's up to you. Your work here has been extraordinary. The CDC would like to offer you a position as a biodefense consultant. You could keep living here in Millbrook, keep practicing medicine, but also help us prepare for situations like this." Dr. Cross looked out at the town where she had built a life. In the distance, she could see Mrs. Patterson reopening the diner and children riding their bicycles again. The people here had accepted her as Dr. Natalie Cross, small-town physician. Now they would know her as something more complex, but they would still know her as someone who had fought to protect them. "I'd like that," she said finally, "but I have one condition." "What's that?" "I want to tell my patients the truth, not the classified details, but the basic facts. They deserve to know who I really am." Frank considered this. "It's unusual, but given the circumstances, I think we can work with that." That evening, Dr. Cross held a town meeting in the high school auditorium. Nearly everyone in Millbrook attended, curious about what had really happened during the 3-day quarantine. "Some of you have probably figured out that I haven't always been a small-town doctor," she began. 8 years ago, I worked for the government on medical defense research. I left that job because I believed the research was being misused. She explained in general terms about the biological threat and how her past experience had helped her address it. She told them about Dr. Vale and his attempt to use Millbrook as a testing ground for dangerous technology. The most important thing I want you to know, she concluded, is that everything I've done here for the past 5 years has been real. This community, this life, the relationships I've built with all of you, none of that was fake or part of some cover story. Millbrook is my home, and you are my family. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Jake Morrison, now fully recovered, stood up from his seat. "Doc, I don't care what you did before you came here," he said. "What matters is what you did for us when we needed you." The applause that followed was genuine and sustained. Mrs. Patterson wiped tears from her eyes. Children who had been patients of Dr. Cross waved from the audience. 6 months later, Dr. Cross was still practicing medicine in Millbrook, but she was also serving as a consultant to the CDC's Biodefense program. Her small clinic had been expanded with a secure laboratory where she could analyze potential biological threats from across the region. More importantly, she had learned something valuable about the nature of identity and belonging. For 8 years, she had believed that her past would always define her, that she could never truly be free of the choices she had made in her previous career. But the people of Millbrook had shown her something different. They had accepted not just Dr. Natalie Cross, the friendly country doctor, but Dr. Rachel Martinez, the former biodefense researcher who had risked everything to do what she believed was right. She was both people, and she was finally at peace with both parts of her story. Late one evening, as she locked up her clinic and prepared to head home, Dr. Cross received a text message from Frank Hamilton. "New potential biological incident in Montana. Could use your expertise if you're available." She smiled, typed back, "On my way," and headed home to pack. The work wasn't finished, but now she was doing it as herself, completely, honestly, and surrounded by a community that knew her true story and supported her anyway. Sometimes the most powerful thing about starting over isn't leaving your past behind. Sometimes it's finding the courage to integrate all the pieces of yourself into something stronger than any single identity could ever be. As she drove through the quiet streets of Millbrook, Dr. Cross reflected on how much had changed since that morning when the emergency alert had shattered the silence. The crisis had ended not just with biological neutralization, but with personal integration. She was no longer running from her past or hiding from her future. She was simply Dr. Cross, small-town physician, biodefense consultant, and most importantly, a trusted member of a community that had embraced her completely. If this story moved you, tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from today. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, please subscribe to the Human Stories channel and help us share more tales of courage, redemption, and the power of community.